All right, so if you watch the news or pay attention to any kind of news feed on social media, something you're probably hearing a lot about is a recession, inflation, rising prices pretty much across the board. And most recently, you've probably heard about layoffs, specifically in the tech industry. And that creates a lot of drama. And for the media, it creates a lot of opportunity to sensationalize certain aspects of these. And if you pay attention to the media at all they're really doing, and they are highly sort of obligated to do this, is that they basically take any event and they try to sensationalize that to a point where you feel over dramatized about it and you get excited about it and you click on it and you watch it and you dig into it and you talk about it and you share it. And it just creates more clicks and more views and more ad revenue for all of these media companies. And they have massive incentives to continue to do that. So I'm not even faulting the media companies. I want consumers to be more aware of what's going on. And when I talk about my influence or people's interest in hearing from me, typically it has to do with Salesforce careers. And more specifically, it's probably transitioning into Salesforce careers from another industry. So at this moment in time, that's a pretty touchy subject, right? Because people are in a fear mindset. And I think generally speaking, not to be like super weird, but I think humans in general, we find ourselves in a fear mindset because it allows us to protect ourselves against things that might be trying to hurt us. So we spend a lot of time worrying and fearful of things that either never are as bad as we expect them to be, or they end up never happening at all. And I find myself in that position a lot of times also. So the reason I'm talking to you today is to talk about the recession, inflation, and being in a position to be in a career that I won't say recession proof, but I will say is more risk averse to a recession, if that makes any sense. And so I want to explain a couple of things, and you're welcome to comment. I'm not an expert. I do have a degree in economics, but I will tell you that in no way qualifies me to talk about these topics because I learned really nothing about the real world impact of inflation and recessions and industries and how that happens in the real world. It was all theoretical. So now that we're getting to live it, it's great because we can have these conversations. So if you have questions or you have comments or you have feedback or articles or whatever you want to share, I think this is a great opportunity to open the conversation, right? So what I want to talk to you about today is specifically Salesforce careers and how they fit into all of this. So the first thing is that if you look back historically at recessions and depressions, you're going to find that they impact different industries. It's not even across the board. When you look at stock market prices plummeting, you don't see an even plummet. Like if we say there's 50% market value lost in like a big index fund like the S&P 500, you're going to find that it's not even across every single industry when these recessions and depressions occur. Typically, it's actually picking out 3 to 5 industries that are impacted. So say in 2008, you saw a massive housing bust, right? We saw a housing bust, which impacted financial services because those were the industry that were housing the loans that were now being foreclosed on. We also saw construction and materials dip because people were no longer building homes. We actually had a home surplus because of all the foreclosed homes. And then you saw a dip. This is pretty across the board in a recession or depression. You're going to see dips in luxury. So new cars, new homes, travel, retail, especially for higher end brands. And you're going to see booms in retail for maybe services like Amazon.com or Walmart, some of the, I don't want to say lower end, but cheaper alternative stores where maybe you don't get the name brand product, but you're searching for more generic products at a better price. You're going to see booms in that type of retail because there's still necessities that we have to have. However, we don't necessarily have to have the same ones we've had in the past or eat exactly the same foods that we've had in the past. So I want you to keep that in mind. The point of that tangent is that recessions and depressions do not impact every industry equally. In fact, oftentimes in recessions, you will see some markets actually gaining traction while other markets are losing traction. So it's not every industry exactly the same across the board. That's going to be important. So keep that in mind. All right. Now, the other thing is that businesses are impacted, right? And that's really the biggest concern. Like when you see the stock market dropping, that's actually the hurt is on the business itself. They're seeing their market drop. They're seeing demand for their products fall. They're having to lay off employees, those kind of things. Again, that is industry specific. So what do those companies attempt to do in order to fight back against these issues? They may attempt to diversify their product lines to offer products that are more recession proof or are proving to be more recession proof in the current recession. They are probably going to try to cut costs. Typically, that's in the form of letting employees go. I think what you're going to find now post-pandemic is that they are more open to remote jobs and closing down headquarters and business offices and sending employees back home in order to cut costs. I think we are opening the conversation more where an employer might come to you personally and ask for you to take a temporary pay cut in order to help the business fight through maybe revenue loss or something like that. So I think you're going to see more clear lines of communication. I think you're going to see more innovative ways to cut costs that aren't necessarily just mass layoffs. And I really don't think, knowing nothing, okay, like I understand, like I know nothing, that this recession is not going to be the 2008 recession, the Great Recession. This is going to be a little bit softer, a little bit more controlled, and hopefully give us time to pivot instead of just this massive, dip straight down. Now, we also need to make sure that we understand that the fact that this is not industry specific is a massive benefit to Salesforce professionals. So why is that? Because Salesforce skills are not industry specific. And that's really important to understand, because I personally, and I can talk about thousands of people who have the same experience, I personally started my career working in healthcare for an electronic health records company. I did some healthcare work for Emory Healthcare in Atlanta. I then moved to doing basically working for a company that did software sales, so a digital product. I also worked in health insurance. I worked in financial services. I've worked for companies in manufacturing air filters, in automotive, basically automotive manufacturing. So the point of that is to tell you that Salesforce skills are not industry specific. And this is really great news for you. And if you haven't connected those dots yet, it's because in a recession, some industries are impacted, other industries are not impacted, and then some industries actually do better because people are switching over to their goods as a substitute for maybe other more expensive goods. And so the reason why that's important is because you're not going to see Salesforce as a career path fall off. What you're going to see is potentially, if you work for a company, let's go back to the 2008 recession. If you work for a company that was in the mortgage and finance industry, then you're probably going to, if you don't lose your job, you're still going to see a lot of your coworkers losing their job. It's going to make you feel very uncomfortable, and you're likely going to want to go work for a different company. Now, if you only have like mortgage and financing skills, then you have to go work for another company, preferably, that does mortgages and financing. And that sucks because those companies are also struggling. So it's going to be very hard for you to pivot. As a Salesforce professional, you can work for a company as a Salesforce professional that handles mortgages and finances and switch over to doing healthcare, or switch over to a company that does retail or insurance or manufacturing or anything in between. And that is so vitally important because it recession proofs your skills. Okay, you're still amazing at Salesforce reports and analytics and automations and streamlining processes for end users, you still have all of those skills that you can apply in a completely different industry. So that's why it's so important to understand that Salesforce is not industry specific. So therefore, you are not as impacted by recessions or depressions because there are already hundreds of thousands of vacant jobs available. So even if the Salesforce ecosystem did get hit, we still have a massive shortage. So chances are anyone who's employed today isn't going to be on the chopping block. Now, that doesn't mean that if you work for a mortgage company today, you might get fired tomorrow. But it's only going to take you a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months at the most, to start applying for jobs in other industries, for other companies, maybe for consulting firms, and hopping into one of those roles. So now, how can we even better prepare ourselves for, let's say, a recession or depression? And it doesn't have to be today. This could be 10 years from now. We can be thinking about these things and how to prepare ourselves. And what I don't want you to do is just say, well, Brad said that Salesforce careers are recession proof and they're not industry specific, so I don't have anything to worry about. While that's reasonably true, and I believe that to be true, and you can, share your opinions in the comments. What I do want you to do is take a few actionable tips away on how you can better prepare yourself, your LinkedIn profile, your resume, and your beliefs about yourself and what type of professional you are to help diversify yourself. So what do we need to do? We need to diversify our skills, knowledge, and really our experience as it applies to industries, right? So if currently today you work in financial services, I would like for you to think about your skills, not specific to financial services, but how that might apply to a healthcare company or how that might apply to a manufacturing company or really any different industry. You could talk tech, nonprofit, retail, food and beverage. There's so many different industries. Just go Google a list of industries. I want you to think more holistically about your skills and how those can apply to different industries, and don't pigeonhole yourself into being a financial services expert on the Salesforce platform. Okay, I want you to be a Salesforce professional who just happens to work for a financial services company at this moment. The same goes, that example could be used for if you're in healthcare right now and we see a dip in the need for healthcare, which we likely won't. Anything like that. So if you work in nonprofit and you think nonprofit might be on the chopping block, or tech or retail or anything else, if you think your industry might be leading up to a struggle, why not combat that by thinking about your skills in another way? Now, if you're a consultant right now and you find yourself being put on the same types of projects in the same industries, I might start seeing if there's a way that you could start working projects in other industries. That way you can diversify your industry experience and put that on your resume so that when something happens and you might want to pivot industries, or you see a strength in another industry during a recession, then you can showcase your value in the industries that are prevailing and therefore showcase that skill and land more of those projects. And this is going to bring up my last point, and I don't want this video to run on forever because I could talk about this for a long time, and that's why I didn't want to do this as a live, because I knew it would stir up conversations. So we can have those conversations in the comments. But consulting, I want to talk about having a Salesforce career in a consulting company versus having a Salesforce career at a single company. And if you come from a finance or investing background at all, or even if you don't, you've probably heard some of these concepts. Investing in a single stock can be a risky investment, right? Because your return is based on the performance of one single company. If you work for if you invest in index funds, you have much less risk, because now you're not going to see massive gains when that company does well, but you're not going to see massive losses when one company doesn't do well. And the great thing about that is it allows you to diversify. So when you see something like a recession, you might see a single stock company absolutely plummet, while you might see an index fund see slow, still downward trending, but much slower downward trending, so you can react, or you can just, mentally prepare for that downward trend, knowing it's going to come up in the future. Now, the reason I bring that up is because working for a single company is very much like owning a single stock. But the difference is when that company performs really, really well, they're not just going to give you pay raises based on their performance, but when they perform very, very poorly, they might fire you if their company cannot afford to pay you anymore. So you only get to keep your job, and you're only impacted by negative situations at a single company. You're typically not impacted if they just triple their income. They're not going to triple your pay. So you're only impacted by the negative aspects of the company, unless you want to count like job stability. Now, when you work for a consulting firm, the opposite can be true. And the reason for that is the exact same thing we've been talking about throughout this video. And that is that when you work for a consultancy, it's like owning an index fund. When one industry is struggling, that's okay, because your consultancy likely has projects and pipelines for companies across a variety of industries. So if they start noticing one industry is struggling, they'll just up their sales in another industry that is prevailing. And so that protects you as a consultant, because it keeps projects in the pipeline, and it allows you to have more job stability through questionable times in the economy, when we're going through times of like recession and depressions and things like that. And when you think about inflation, I will say the same thing. Inflation does not impact every industry equally. You'll notice during times of inflation like this, that's the price of a lot of goods goes through the roof, but you'll notice that the price of other goods actually stay pretty much the same. So if you look around, you might notice that groceries are increasing, like foods are increasing in cost, but you might notice that technology like computers or internet service or things like that are not really increasing that dramatically compared to what you might be seeing in, say, cars or homes or food. Now, the reason why that's important is because when companies are looking to combat inflation or they're looking to combat revenue losses, what they'll do is they're going to turn to technology in order to be more efficient and more productive as a company, and seeing what they can automate so that they don't have to hire new employees, or maybe even so that they can let an employee go and let a system like Salesforce automate that job. And that makes you even more valuable, because you're the expert behind the scenes who's going to allow that to be possible. And you'll also notice that when they convert over to wanting more and more technology because they want to automate more and they want to cut costs, that's actually going to cause inflation in salaries for these tech jobs. So yes, you might see a starter, like a leading indicator of inflation in food and gas and housing. And then you're probably going to see a lagging indicator of massive inflation in tech and some of those industry specific salaries that are benefiting companies because of what they provide in order to combat inflation and combat revenue loss for those companies. So I hope that makes some sense. Please leave me your feedback. I'd love to hear from you guys. What I really want to do is not just have you respond to me, but really open the conversation with others. I don't want it to turn into an argument. I certainly don't want it to become political, because I don't believe it is political. And I think this is just a time for us, if you're feeling uncertain, if you're feeling fearful, take a deep breath, open these lines of communication, try to understand how to prepare yourself, because there's no need to be scared of something if you're not willing to take action and prepare yourself. Otherwise, what's the point of being fearful if you're not going to do anything about it? So I hope that helps. I hope this opens the conversation. Thanks everybody for listening to me talk about something that I know very little about. And I just hope this creates more thinking and action and intention around not just being someone who's worried about something, but someone who does something about it when they're worried about something.